Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 2004 historical drama film, The Aviator. Now, The Aviator is one of those movies that I was aware of. I definitely knew of its existence because of the fact that it was definitely an Oscar bait kind of film in 2004. And I do remember reading some positive reviews of it over the years. And it's a film that I would say I had a little curiosity for, mainly because of the fact that it's a film about Howard Hughes. And in my opinion, his life is genuinely fascinating. And so I felt like, okay, that can make for a compelling biopic. But I guess I was a little iffy on the casting of Leonardo DiCaprio. And there were other things, especially the runtime, that honestly made me basically kind of run away from it because I just didn't want to spend nearly 3 hours watching a movie about only part of Howard Hughes's life. But after finally sitting down and watching the entire thing, I can say that it was worth a watch, but I can also say that I am one of those people that really wasn't that fond of this film. There are things about it that I like and I think are genuinely incredible and great. But as a whole, it's just a film that just didn't resonate with me that strongly. I don't think it soared as high as it could have. Now, before I go any further sharing my thoughts on it, though, I want to give a special shout out to Ryan for requesting yet another review. The Aviator is directed by Martin Scorsese, and this would rank pretty low on my list of favorite Scorsese films, but that's just me. I think this is one of his lesser films, and it's not due to his direction because once again, Scorsese is just spectacular. He created some very splendid visuals in this. The usage of the pans and the zooms and the different types of shots, like the wide or the tight shots, were really impressive and technically sound. And I definitely feel that there are some shots in this that are really awe-inspiring. And a lot of it has to do with the shots that feature aviation, which makes sense because it's the Aviator, and I think Scorsese he really wanted to focus on the beauty and the majesty and uh, the unique look and feel of aviation in this particular time period because this was in a lot of ways the pioneering era of aviation, and Howard Hughes was such a major part of that. And not only that, but also Hollywood and the era that was going on where talkies hadn't really solidified themselves just yet, but they were starting to become more and more popular. And so you were in this era of cinema where color was also starting to become a thing, at least parts of it. And people were talking, and you were actually hearing that dialogue. And there was a transition period between like the 20s and the 30s, and I feel that that was definitely something that Scorsese showcased rather well in this film. He also showcased the 40s well visually, um, and it's just a movie that is a treat to watch in that regard, just to see a master of his craft in Scorsese fly as high and as far as he can. with his film and with the camera work and just to create a film that is a genuine visual tour de force. I think that Scorsese's direction is easily one of the most impressive and one of the best things about The Aviator. The screenplay, on the other hand, not so much. The screenplay is by writer John Logan, and John is the kind of writer who, when he's really in his bag, he is absolutely fantastic. Like, he's a writer that can really turn in some terrific work. But when he's not all the way in his bag, he can create something that's either kind of mid or not very good. So he's that kind of writer. And I know a lot of writers you could argue are the same, but it seems like he has a really high ceiling and then he has a very low ceiling at the same time. Because this is the same writer who wrote Star Trek Nemesis, by the way. But he's also the same writer who wrote The Last Samurai and Gladiator. Now, I don't think that this screenplay is as bad as something like Star Trek Nemesis, but I also feel that it's a pretty so-so disappointing script overall. For one, the fact that it only tells half of Howard Hughes' story, I think by design, is something that doesn't work out that well for me. It's a interesting choice, but I wish this was a film that, considering its runtime, actually talked about his entire life. I don't think that there was enough drama, enough moments, enough things that happened throughout these first 3 decades of his life that were compelling enough to warrant nearly 3 hours of runtime. I really don't. So I think that's a mistake. And especially when I look at all the other proposed Howard Hughes films that never got made, and a good chunk of them actually did talk about his whole life. Uh, the fact that the one big budget Howard Hughes movie that we got is a film that only tells half the story, that's honestly a bit of a letdown. Especially when it comes to how fascinating his entire life story is. Another thing that I think the writer didn't do nearly as good of a job to me was providing this film with a genuine heart and soul. This feels like a very hollow movie, almost as hollow as some of the planes that Howard Hughes created and built and flew, like the Spruce Goose. Like, it almost feels as thin and as hollow as that plane did when it comes to some of its parts. I think in large part, it has to do with the way that Howard Hughes was written. Howard Hughes does come across as a very brilliant, intelligent man who's very driven, who's eccentric, and really was a genuine pioneer for the realm of aviation. But he also comes across like an absolute asshole. And I know that that's the reality of it, but when you don't see enough of the good side of this man, it really makes for a hard story to sit through, let alone care about, because you're just watching the exploits of an asshole billionaire. Like, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, all right, yeah, his love affair with Katharine Hepburn falls apart. I'm supposed to feel something? Why? Oh, he flies 3 different test planes and then the third one crashes and he almost dies. I'm supposed to feel bad for him? Why? Oh, he has crippling OCD and he had a rough childhood. Okay, all right, but at the same time, the guy is a rich prick, and he's written that way for most of the movie. And from the beginning, it tries to make you sympathetic towards him because of this flashback of when he was a kid. So I don't really know exactly what Logan was trying to do here. Okay, let's make you sympathize with Howard with this scene with him and his mother, that is very uncomfortable to watch, and definitely showcases why he's the way he is and why he has a lot of issues with quarantine and with germs. But then he just acts like an absolute asshole for most of the movie. So it's like, I don't really care, man. I don't care what your problems are. I don't care about your trials and tribulations, Howard, because you're a douche. So, and I think if it was balanced out better with some of these other side characters, these other people that saw the good in him, like Ava Gardner, for instance, it tries to do that with Hepburn, but then when the whole thing happens, when they break up and she goes and decides to be with Spencer Tracy, it doesn't really give Ava enough to make her feel as fully fleshed out as Catherine did. And the fact that Ava is the one that's here for him after he went into a seclusion and was inside this germ-free environment for 3 months, and she was the one who went and risked things and decided to deal with him and cared about him enough to go into the germ-free zone and give him a haircut and motivate him enough to get out of this funk that he was in and get out of the quarantine so he can get to court, get to the trial so he can defend himself against the senator. You would think that that relationship would carry more weight because of what she ultimately chooses to do, but it doesn't. Uh, Logan really dropped the ball when it comes to Ava Gardner and her relationship with Howard Hughes. Instead, it focuses more, it seems like, on this other fling that he had with this 16-year-old girl, which makes Hughes look like an even bigger asshole. And I have to be honest, some of the stuff involving the different exploits and the different things that he does with the planes, it's not as interesting as I think the writer or even Scorsese thinks they are. Uh, I don't think you needed to see all three of his failed test flights. The first one and the third one, where he almost died, is more than enough. I also feel that if you're going to have a focus on Hell's Angels and him making this expensive Hollywood production, show more about the behind the scenes, show more about what the film is, and show more about the casting process. It just felt like a lot of the stuff involving Hell's Angels was like an afterthought, and it was just more for showing the excess of the 20s and the parties and the extravagant lifestyle that he was living, and less about the movie that he was trying to make. So the first part of the film just feels kind of, um, I don't know if withdrawn is the right word, but it definitely feels more distant than I think it should, because okay, it's all about the era when he was funding and trying to make this ambitious movie in Hell's Angels. And then you don't really get a lot of the Hell's Angels stuff except for like maybe I think like a couple scenes. The rest is just him going to parties and schmoozing around and trying to secure finances, and him trying to get these other planes built and off the ground. And then you have the whole chunk of the movie that's just him courting Katharine Hepburn. And then It's essentially a romance at that point between the two. And it's kind of sweet, but it's also kind of hollow in its own way. And then you have a large chunk of the film that is just devoted to the battle between Pan Am and TWA. And I think some of that is compelling, but some of it is just repetitive and just becomes kind of dull. Despite, the espionage and the backstabbing and the back and forths and the whole stuff with the senator, who was bought and paid for by Pan Am and Brewster and his feud with Howard Hughes. And then you also have the stuff involving the spy plane and it crashing and Hughes almost dying because of it. And then you have the uh triumph of the Hercules where it actually does fly and him winning the battle against the senator and the battle with Pan Am, and succeeding and fighting for TWA survival. It was a very important part of aviation history for sure because Pan Am was trying to take over entirely. And if it wasn't for Hughes fighting and not giving up on the TWA and not selling it to Pan Am and not succumbing to the pressure that Pan Am was putting him under, uh, Pan Am would have had a monopoly on airline flights. And that would have had a pretty significant impact on airline history. So I think that's definitely an important thing, but I don't think it's as compelling as it or as interesting overall as Logan thinks that it is. And the stuff with OCD, I think also is a bit repetitive. There's only so much you can really say about OCD to begin with. And when you get to the point where you see him repeat himself and have these panic attacks like once, the fact that it kind of does that like more times after that, it almost feels like you're kind of padding things out. It feels like you're just trying to use panic attacks as an excuse to stretch things out some more. And it does lead to some genuinely compelling and interesting and memorable moments, like, send in the milk and the whole stuff when he's just losing his mind and he's in isolation and he's just completely cracking. And I do think that that is something that really could have been expanded upon more if it did tell his whole story. But you don't really get that. You get a glimpse, you get a idea of what's to come for him, what's going to be his future. You see him triumph with the plane flying, with the Hercules flying successfully, and then you get the rug pulled out from underneath you at the end when you think that, okay, he's now doing better, he's gotten over the things that led him to cracking up and losing his mind for those 3 months. He's cleaned up his act. He's got a new lease on life. He's gonna try to make it work with Ava, and then he starts having another panic attack. And the end of the film is him isolated in quarantine again, essentially repeating the last words that he said about the future, the way of the future, and once again succumbing to the debilitating OCD and to his mental illness and being grounded. A man who is brilliant, a brilliant mind when it comes to engineering in the realm of aviation, and a man who wants to be in the air, a man who wants to fly. He is grounded again. And so I think that that does create an interesting way to end the movie, but the way that it's set up, it feels unsatisfying to me. It just feels like it just stops. And I think if it carried on and you told his whole story, you saw what happened after that, you saw his complete fall from grace, then I think that that really would have resonated a lot strongly. I think it would have resonated better when it comes to the whole width and the breadth and just the entirety of his story and his saga. And like I said, it doesn't help either that the way that Howard is written, he just doesn't just come across as a stubborn guy. He comes across as a jerk. I know that probably was the reality of it, but I'm sorry, that doesn't make for something that's worthy of watching somebody for 3 hours. Like it's nearly 3 hours long, and you're stuck with this guy who's honestly kind of insufferable and pretentious, likes the smell of his own farts, and that can definitely become something that's genuinely insufferable at points. To watch this guy just crash and burn so much and just be such a genuine pain in the ass. And I do feel that there's a lot of this script. There's a lot of moments. There's a lot of parts of his life at this point throughout these decades that are covered in the screenplay. They could have just been cut out of this and you wouldn't have missed anything. And it would have made the story tighter. It would have made it, in my opinion, less boring and less hollow. But I still think for the most part it's an okay script because it does have some good dialogue. It does have some compelling arcs here and there. And I do think that when it comes to the OCD, when it comes to his mental illness, when it comes to the moment in his life when he first puts himself into quarantine for months and then gets out of it, and then the whole turmoil of the trial and everything, and the triumphant flight of the Hercules, I definitely do feel that those are elements of the screenplay that are actually quite excellent, but there's just so much about it that is either too excessive to me or is disappointing. And the fact that it does tell half the story really does limit the effectiveness of this particular film that's about Howard Hughes. I would have liked this a lot more if it told his entire story. That's really, honestly, what it comes down to the most. Is it? I don't really get that invested in half his story. The cast, I definitely think it's one of the stronger elements of the movie, other than the direction and the cast. I definitely think it's one of the more stronger elements of the film, other than the cinematography and the direction. Leonardo DiCaprio, I think he's excellent casting when it comes to the young, ambitious Howard Hughes, who has this mountain of money to work with and starts to make this incredibly ambitious film in Hell's Angels. And also the Howard Hughes who starts wooing Katharine Hepburn. But when he's playing the 40-year-old version of Howard Hughes, I didn't really buy that. And I think maybe a different actor to play the older Howard Hughes, or maybe give him some makeup or something. It's like all they did is give him a goatee and like a beard, and he still looked like he was way too baby faced and way too young to be Howard of that age. So I felt that was an aspect of the performance that was kind of a miss for me. Also, I don't really think he did a great job making Howard feel like he was a different person throughout the years, seeing that evolution or seeing that change in his character, other than the OCD moments, which he did a really good job with that. And apparently, he studied really hard when it comes to OCD and how people react to it, and I think he definitely nailed that. But there are other aspects of the performance that I felt were not necessarily as good as the others. So I do think for the most part it is a good performance by DiCaprio, but I don't think it's great. I don't think it's up there with his performances and his career that he would do later on in his life. I don't. I think he's still trying to hone his skills at this point. I think this is DiCaprio who's still trying to um, find the right mix of acting techniques and to really enhance and really strengthen his abilities at this point, because he's still kind of in that in between point as an actor to me when it comes to his role in this. Like you could honestly argue that there's not much of a difference between his Howard Hughes here and Jack from Titanic. And the only reason why there maybe is a little bit of a difference is because of the OCD stuff. Jack from Titanic, but with OCD. Like you kind of get a little bit of that at points with his Howard. Um, the rest of the cast, I think, does some good work too. Cate Blanchett, she was lovely as Katharine Hepburn. I think her performance wasn't necessarily best supporting actress worthy though. Like I don't think it's that good. It's still a good performance, but I think there were some moments where she kind of laid on the theatrics a little bit too much, playing Hepburn. But for the most part, I do think that it was a good performance by her. Kate Beckinsale, gorgeous woman. I can't say a whole lot about her Ava Gardner because she's barely in the movie, and I don't really get a very good grasp on her character, other than she just has a fling with Howard, and that's really about it. And she seems to care about him. But it's kind of hard to really criticize Kate that much because she was given such a really weak role, and it was a role that should have been more important. Like Katharine Hepburn's role, okay, all right. I get why they focused on that because it was one of Howard's first flings. But Ava was there for him in the end. When it comes to being there, going into the germ-free zone, getting him ready for the trial, Hepburn was gone at that point. She was with Spencer Tracy. But I understand why you had the whole thing with Howard and Catherine, and I'm glad it's there. But I do think Ava should have been focused on more than she was, and I think that would have given Kate more to work with. Um, John C. Reilly, he's also good in this as Noah, Howard's right hand man. He's the guy who stands by his side throughout everything and through thick and thin, and it showcases that John C. Reilly is actually a pretty multifaceted actor in his own right. Uh, he plays this role very straight. There really isn't anything about his performance in this that is comedic. So this is him doing a more dramatic role and nailing it. Alec Baldwin is Juan Tripp. He's slimy. He's smarmy. Definitely a guy who you want to root against and want to see him lose. Same thing goes for Alan Alda as a Brewster. But I wouldn't really say that performances were anything that spectacular to me. Like they did a good job playing essentially politicians, the kind of guys who talk out of one side of their face. You know, they manipulate, they lie, they cheat, they steal, you know, those kind of people. Um, Ian Holm plays a professor, and it's kind of an over the top performance. I don't. It honestly feels like tonally it doesn't even match with the movie at points. Danny Huston plays a guy named Jack Fry. Who I think is somebody who's involved with DiCaprio's character Hughes in some capacity. I think he's like a guy who helps with financing with the film or with the airline or what. I don't remember exactly what his role was, and he barely was in it, so can't really blame me. Gwen Stefani plays Jean Harlow. She's in it for like 5 minutes. Has like maybe a few lines of dialogue, if even that. And I could tell why, because she's not the best actress. Jude Law, it was fun to see him as Errol Flynn, but he's in it for one scene and then he's gone. And when it comes to some of the other supporting roles, like Adam Scott as Johnny Meyer, like, I mean, Adam Scott just seemed kind of out of place here in this kind of movie. Almost as out of place as his fake looking mustache that he was wearing um, throughout the film. Brent Spiner plays a character named Robert E. Gross, and he's just a guy who essentially is one of the technicians, one of the engineers who has this plan for a plane, and he sells the planes to Hughes for the TWA, and it doesn't work out in the end. Um, Edward Herrmann has a bit role in this as Joseph Breen. Willem Dafoe has a small role in this as Roland Sweet, this guy who took some photos of Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn, and is going to be release them into the magazines and the tabloids of the time, and Hughes pays him off in order for him to not release the photos. But other than that role, and other than like a few other people here and there, I don't really have much else to say about the rest of the cast. I do think DiCaprio and Blanchett are the ones that, in my opinion, for the most part, do the best work in this. But Reilly and Baldwin and Alda also provide some solid roles as well. The cinematography by Robert Richardson I thought was remarkable. I think this is a really great looking movie. It really has a very distinct visual style. Um, the visual style is a little much though when it comes to like the first 50 minutes or so, trying to make it look like a Technicolor. I don't think it's a Technicolor, but it's trying to make it look like an old color film with the color filtering and just the overall way that the blues and the reds and all of that is utilized being um, very overblown in a lot of ways, exactly like how a lot of older color films, like the first color films were. They definitely had that kind of look to them. But I don't think that was really necessary. It creates an unique kind of interesting look, but I don't think it should have been there for like almost an hour of the movie. It didn't need to be the entire 1920s, 1930s portion of the film. Like you could have easily just had that for like the first little bit when he's working on the Hell's Angels and trying to get that film off the ground and then just ended it there. I don't think you really needed to have that kind of look to the film be for that long of the runtime. Because honestly, it gets to the point where it's more of a distraction than it is something that actually enhances the visuals. Uh, and the editing by Thelma Shoemaker, I definitely think for the most part was pretty good, pretty solid. The music by Howard Shore, I felt it worked for the film, but it's not what I would consider to be one of his best scores. I definitely don't feel that way about this score. Like it adds to some of the emotion in some scenes, and It can provide some tension on its own, but it's not a score that I think is up there with some of his best. And visual effects wise, there were some moments with the planes, there were some moments with the CGI and the green screen that look good, but then there's other moments that did not age well at all, and they look pretty bad. I have to be honest, they look really fake. And for a film that is trying to have like an emphasis on aviation and the early time, before everything was solidified, when it comes to like aviation technology, and it's more like the Wild West for aviation, to just have so much of it just be CGI and just really bad looking CGI too. That was definitely something that held the film back a little bit for me too. But I would say at the end of the day, I did still like the film, but I definitely didn't love it. The elements were there for something excellent, but I don't really think the manufacturing was done the right way. I think they missed some parts. And I think maybe when it comes to the planning portion, the plans were a little bit too awry for my tastes. But anyway, that's my thoughts on The Aviator, and as always, I'll see you later. See ya.